Hello, welcome. I wanted to talk more about X-Men. Deadpool Wolverine is coming out, and this is going to be the end of the X-Men universe for the third or fourth time, depending on how you count it. Um so I wanted to go back and rewatch all the X-Men movies except for the bad ones. So I'm going to skip some of those and I'm going to talk about them, and that's this. Today we're talking about X-Men 1, the first X-Men, not the first class, but the first movie that they made, the about X-Men. X-Men number 1, the first 2000, the year is they're wearing leather. Today, I really like this movie. It's great. The thing about the first X-Men movie to me is that it's always kind of felt like a pilot to for the X-Men show, or like like the build up to X-Men 2 when it actually really gets good. However, it is really solid on its own as well. I really like how this one slowly reveals information and slowly introduces you to this world. Um, I mostly just want to talk about X-Men 2. That's the problem. I watched them both back to back, and I was gonna do this. I was gonna do a record in between each movie, my thoughts, and then I didn't do that, and so now I just want to talk about X-Men 2. Um, okay, X-Men 1 is solid, but then when you get to X-Men 2, they just kind of improve upon literally every aspect of it. So it's hard to talk about the first one as its own thing also, because it feels so much like a pilot or something. Like we're just introducing you to the characters of this world and what's going on. Like I said, I really like the first third or so, as we're slowly learning more about this world through the eyes of like Rogue and Wolverine, but we're also getting stuff. We're also getting some scenes with Charles and Magneto, until eventually Wolverine gets brought to the Xavier School for Gifted Mutants or whatever, and then we get a whole bunch of like just exposition scenes of Xavier explaining things to Wolverine about mutants and who the X-Men are and who Magneto is and what their deal is and what's going and what Cerebro is and what everyone's powers are and all that stuff. One of the things that I think is smart about this movie is that they kind of Han Solo it a little bit with Wolverine, where they make him think that everything is about the X-Men is stupid, so that the audience is like kind of more on board for some of the goofier aspects of everything, where like Xavier wheels up and he's just like telling everyone, here's Storm and Cyclops, and Wolverine's like, those are all dumb names. You guys are all dumb, and it's great. It works the same way that Han Solo works in Star Wars, where he kind of thinks the Force and all the like magic stuff in this universe is stupid, and so then you're kind of more on board for it because you can at least relate to the one guy that thinks all of this is dumb. The movie really slows down in like the middle to the second half or so, and the pacing is kind of weird and not that good. We lose a sense of urgency because this movie has like very few action scenes. I would even hesitate to call them like fight scenes too. Or there's it's a lot of the action scenes in this movie are like two or three singular action beats, where like Wolverine's car crashes, he falls out the window, then Sabretooth shows up and hits him with the tree, and then Storm shows up and blows away Sabretooth, and that's the whole scene. Like that kind of stuff, where there isn't really like a fight or anything. It's just like a couple uses of each character's powers. There's a lot of stuff in this one where they're just like still figuring things out. One of the things that I find frustrating about this movie is that basically all the X-Men except for Wolverine are pretty useless. Like there's a scene in the third act where Toad manages to take out Cyclops, Storm, and Jean Grey all by himself. Toad, the most powerful mutant who has a long tongue, and that's basically it. Like, him taking out Cyclops, I could understand, but Storm and Jean Grey, who are two of the most powerful mutants ever, like, there's so many scenes in this movie where, like, Jean Grey just forgets that she has powers, or Storm forgets that she has powers in order to make, like, Wolverine look cooler. There's some parts I don't mind. I think the fight with Wolverine against Mystique is pretty good, and I conceptually like the idea of Wolverine saving Rogue by letting her absorb his healing powers. That works pretty well, and they set it up earlier in the movie too, so there's some nice little beats going on. I like it. Magneto rules. He's so cool. Ian McKellen absolutely kills it. Patrick Stewart as well is also great. And their chemistry is great. Their relationship is so interesting. One of the things I'm noticing about these movies is that Magneto, whenever he's doing his like evil plan, it's always in response to something. It's always in like retaliation. He doesn't just do an evil thing to be evil. Like he's always provoked in some way, or at least he feels that he's provoked. In the first movie, Senator Kelly is proposing this Mutant Registration Act, and there's going to be like a big vote on it, and Magneto's like, okay, I know where this is going. When you tell a certain group of people that they have to be put on a register, like that's the first step to that's the first step to what could become a Holocaust. So like, I'm not on board with this. So that's when he comes up with, in this one, his plan is to build this machine that will turn humans into mutants. And so he's going to use it on the UN summit that's happening in New York and turn all of the world leaders into mutants, so that now that they're affected by the thing that they're voting on, maybe they'll think twice about having to make all the mutants be registered, for example. But of course, there's two flaws in his plan. Number one, the machine only kind of works, and it does turn Senator Kelly into a mutant, but then his molecules are all unstable because it didn't occur naturally. So and then he turns into goop and melts. But Magneto's not really worried about that, and he's like, well, if it kills them all, like that works for me. I'm okay with that. And I like that angle too, that like if his first plan doesn't work, he'll just default to killing all humans, and he's like, that also serves my purposes. I'm all right with that. But obviously the other flaw in his plan is that it's a meeting of the United Nations, which is like not where all the world leaders are. So it would be pretty like, it wouldn't really affect anything if all the symbolic members of the United Nations turn into mutants. Like, they don't control anything, so it wouldn't affect change on the same level that he's hoping it would. I think they do mention that the president's gonna be there as like a or something. So at least that would fit his plan. But anyways, the idea is. The concept is sound of trying to turn the people who are actually in power into the people who don't have power, in order to give them some perspective. And if that doesn't work, just kill them. I think it's still a fun plan and a solid use of Magneto's like philosophy and morality. He's such an interesting villain because, like, yeah, one, like what I said, he at least in these first few movies, he doesn't just decide he's going to destroy the world or anything because he's evil. Like, it's always in response or in retaliation to something specific. And two, like, he's kind of right about a lot of stuff, and that makes him a really interesting villain. He's great. I feel bad for James Marsden's Cyclops in this movie because they really give him absolutely nothing to do and nothing to work with, and then they're like, oh, I guess it was because we couldn't see his eyes, it was impossible to make him interesting. I'm like, well, you could have tried a little harder. Wolverine also just hates him immediately for no reason. Like, before even knowing that he's dating Jean Grey, like, Wolverine just instantly hates him just cause he's James Marsden, who has done nothing wrong. James Marsden is always put in these like roles in so many movies where he's like the romantic opposition to the main guy that we're supposed to like and be rooting for. But the majority of the time, James Marsden is just like a nice guy and has done nothing wrong, and it is just kind of boring, and that's his like biggest flaw. What else do I have to say about this movie? But I do really like this one, and I think it is still pretty solid. There's a lot of moments that I think are really great, particularly any scene with Magneto. I like Wolverine and Rogue's dynamic. I think it's cute. And yeah, that's the first X-Men movie. It's pretty good. I like it. Okay, let's talk about X-Men 2, or X2, X-Men United, or X2, or the good one. This movie fucking rules. It's so great. It hits on every single level, and everything about the first movie that worked is now elevated to the highest degree. Every character gets at least something to do for the most part. And it balances all these different characters and all these different arcs extremely well. There are some characters that I wish would get like a little bit more fleshed out here and there, but overall we give everyone a little bit of character development, a little bit of something interesting to do. At the bare minimum, there's like setup and payoff for a lot of these different characters, which is always nice to see. And just, yeah, the action is so much better, it's so much cooler. That fucking opening with Nightcrawler breaking into the White House is one of the greatest like comic book superhero action scenes ever. Just, it's an all-timer. It rules. It's so fucking cool. Excellent wire work and stunt work paired with like VFX, like great makeup effects obviously on Nightcrawler. Everything about like it just, this movie just hits on every single level. It's so fucking good. It's almost night and day too between the first one and this one. Like it's that much. The first one is really solid, but this one like improves so much that it feels like it's done by an entirely new team or something, but it's not. It's the same exact director and cinematographer and writers and everything, but somehow this one just hits on such a hard level, such a higher level. I think it does have obviously the benefit of being a sequel, so we don't have to spend too much time like working on exposition or telling us or introducing us to these characters. But even so, it does so much more with the characters in this one based on what was just kind of the bare essentials in the first one. Like Bobby, Rogue, and Pyro have this fun little trio in this movie. That is technically set up in the first one, though it's literally just one scene and Pyro is played by a different guy. Bobby, or Iceman, does have a few scenes in the first one, but really there's not much to him in that one. He's mostly there to be impersonated by Mystique so that she can like fuck shit up. But with just a few sequences and a lot of really smart writing that's always doing more than one thing, we get to know everything you need to about all three of these characters. Like, the Mansion gets attacked, Wolverine kills a whole bunch of guys, and it's fucking awesome. There's no blood, but this movie does like PG-13 violence really, really well, where there's some like brutal kills in this movie, and Wolverine gets to like really fuck people up, and there's not really any blood somehow, but it doesn't really matter because it's still really cool. So then Wolverine and Rogue, Bobby, and Pyro escape from the mansion after it gets attacked by Stryker's guys, and they end up at Bobby's house, and he has this like coming out as a mutant scene to his parents, which is fun. And apparently that was Ian McKellen's idea, which I like, because he's of course one of the gays, one of our favorite gays, in fact. And I bet you $1 billion that's one of the things that drew him to the role of Magneto, is the like very obvious parallel between mutants and the gays. And it obviously, and it, it's many different metaphors as well. It was initially more of a racism metaphor, but it's come to represent any type of discriminate group that's been discriminated against. And yeah, the social commentary in this one is really strong, and I like it a lot. But yeah, there's this great moment in this whole sequence where they're at Bobby's house for a little bit, where Pyro is just like looking at all these like exaggerated happy family photos of Bobby and his family on the wall and stuff, and it's just this like one shot of Pyro looking at it, and it tells you everything you need to know about this character. Is like, okay, we get it. This is something that Pyro does not have. If he does have a family, they don't love and accept him. Which is heartbreaking, but and you kind of get like why he gets radicalized later on in the movie. Like that whole sequence is really, really smart. Like there's a part where his younger brother runs away because he's like scared of what's going on right now, and like we cut to his room and we see that he's been like watching too much Fox News and is like becoming radicalized against mutants, and he calls the cops on them. The cops show up and shoot Wolverine in the fucking head because they're cops, and like he's okay, he survives, but like they didn't know he could do that. They didn't know he could heal. They just killed a guy so casually and so without warning that when Pyro like burns down all the like cop cars, you're kind of like, yeah, fuck those guys. Yeah, there's this like excellent little scene later on between Magneto and Pyro where he's like, what's your name? And he's like, John. And he's like, and then Magneto's like, what's your real name, John? So fucking good. Like he's just like, oh, this kid, like he immediately recognizes like, oh, this kid's got like an attitude and is like hates the world. I can radicalize him. I can bring him over to my side real easy. Yeah, Nightcrawler and Storm get to have a little bit of a moment. It's really short and really simple, but it works. They give Storm something to do in this movie, and they remember that her powers are cool. Jean Grey is a little bit less useless in this one, but it's also, we're setting up the Phoenix, so it makes sense that her like she's hesitant to use her powers too much, and she's having headaches and whatever. There's at least like plot reasons for why she's not just like insta killing all of the bad guys end of movie. This movie also does something really smart with Xavier. The Weekly Planet always rags on the X-Men movies for having a moment where Xavier gets Professor X'd, where he either gets killed or he loses his powers or he gets put in a coma or something, because the writers realize that Professor X is too powerful and could easily solve pretty much anything if they don't do something to depower him. But I think X2 has the best use of this because they use the fact that Xavier is so powerful as part of the threat. William Stryker's plan is to twist Xavier's power and use and mind control him essentially to make him concentrate hard enough through Cerebro to kill every single mutant on the planet, which is a scary fucking thought that Xavier could do that, which I think is why it works on this one. The way that Xavier gets like taken out is like it's like the fact that Xavier is that powerful is actually really scary if things go wrong. Also, William Stryker is such a great villain as well. Like, Magneto rules and we sympathize with him and we kind of get where he's coming from, which is why like he's such a compelling villain. But Stryker, Brian Cox as Stryker is just like the perfect asshole. He's pretty much just evil and racist, like racist coded, and he's completely aware of what mutants are capable of, which is why he's so afraid of them and why he wants to take the most extreme measures possible to get rid of them. All the stuff with Wolverine works really well too. We get to have a fight between Wolvie and Lady Deathstrike, who's very different from her comic book counterpart, and she doesn't really have much of a personality or backstory or anything here, but she does have a cool look and an extremely cool and brutal fight against Wolverine. Because they can both like heal to some extent, they're just fucking going at each other in really gruesome and brutal ways. which is like surprising how much they were able to get away with this PG-13 movie. And then she gets like this extremely brutal death where Wolverine like pumps her full of adamantium and it's like pouring out of her eyes and nose and shit. It's disgusting and horrifying. She like clunks down into the little bathtub with this like great excellent sound design. It's like we're showing this is one of the only ways we could kill someone like Wolverine, and it's like the most brutal thing. We pump them full of this indestructible liquid metal until it suffocates them and they die in one of the grossest ways possible. It rules. It's awesome. Again, like I said last time, one of the things that I love about Magneto as a villain in at least these first few movies is his evil plan always comes from a place of retaliation. Stryker has orchestrated this assassination attempt on the president in order to get access to resources and funding so he can take over Cerebro, capture Professor X, and create this evil Cerebro to destroy, to kill all the mutants in the world. It's super duper evil, and Magneto's like, okay, well then I need to like stop that guy. But then because he's been playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers, Magneto just flips the switch on Xavier and gets him to kill all the humans instead. Cold fucking move, Magneto, but also respect. It works so well because it is like the most extreme you could go with his ideology of like, we need to kill all the humans because they're never gonna stop. But because it comes from like well, they fucking started it. Like, they're the ones that came up with this evil plan to kill all the mutants. I'm just like giving them a taste of their own medicine. You kind of sort of see his side of things, even though he's like, I'll do a genocide. Fuck it. Great villain. So good. A lot of the best X-Men movies are also the ones where like we have to end up working with Magneto in some way. So I love that whole angle of it. Mystique is also super interesting in this movie, mostly because we learn more about her, but also not really. She has almost a mystery about her, you know? Like, I love this scene between Mystique and Wolverine, where after Wolverine gets rejected by Jean Grey, while they're like camping in the woods somewhere, Mystique goes into his tent disguised as Jean Grey and starts like making out with him and is like, let's do this. And Wolverine's into it for a minute until he figures out that it's Mystique. Like, this scene is more to play with Wolverine's character than anyone else's. But then you start to ask like, well, wait a minute, why did Mystique do this? That's what, like, she's asking Wolverine like what he wants, but what does Mystique want? And I don't know, and I find that so fascinating. Is she just kind of into him? Like, I mean, it's Hugh Jackman. I understand. Is she like just trying to fuck with him? Is she mad at him because he stabbed her in the last movie and she's like trying to get back at him in some weird way? I don't know. Because it also seems to be a little bit implied that Mystique and Magneto have like a little bit of a thing going on. But like, I don't know, maybe it's an open thing. Mystique's a shapeshifter, and like in the comics she gets around. So maybe she's just into Wolverine. I don't know, but I find that all of that so interesting, and I love that scene. I think it's great. I think it's like cool to have a scene that they don't really explain anything, and it's completely open to interpretation, and it makes Mystique even more interesting. And she was already a pretty cool character. I like her in these movies a lot. She's got a great look, and the way like she moves and stuff is really weird and fascinating. Just 10 out of 10. It's very different from the Mystique from the comics, but the vibe is right. Yeah, X-Men 2, man. It's just one of the all-timers. It's one of the all-time great superhero movies. And it's probably the best X-Men movie. It just hits on every level. Every character gets something to do. It balances many different character arcs without feeling cluttered or messy. It's paced extremely well. Like, the first movie is an hour and 45 minutes and it feels way longer. This one's like 2 hours 15, something around there, but it flies by. It's it just rules. It's just really fucking good. I think that's it for now. So tune in. Next up is the third one, X-Men, the third one.
And sometimes we play chess with real people's lives in the balance.
I remembered I have this Wolverine claw, so I'm gonna be using this the rest of the video, unless I forget. X-Men 3, the last one, the last stand. X-Men 3, but the 3 is the Wolverine claws. This is the final X-Men movie. They never made any more after this. We're not even halfway through, and that's including all the ones I'm skipping. So this one is a bit of a mixed bag. It has sort of a stink on it, and it's often considered the bad one.
They say you're the bad guy.
Is that what they say?
But then there was like a lot more after this one that were way worse. So on like retrospect, I think this one is actually one of the gooder ones, or at least not as bad as people say. It does have a lot of like weird stuff about it. Like the now canceled director left this project partway through to go work on Superman Returns, which is also not that good. And because of that, James Marsden also left this movie. So he's in like 2 scenes, and then he dies off screen so that he could show up in Superman Returns and play James Marsden and get cucked by Superman. It's like, why? But luckily they brought in other now canceled director to finish this one off and close out the trilogy. Final chapters, or like final entries in a trilogy, are usually pretty hard to pull off. Usually they're the weaker ones of any given trilogy. And that's kind of the case here. But there's also a lot of stuff in this one that I kind of vibe with. The biggest problem with this one is that it's really messy, because it's kind of doing 2 entirely different plot lines at once. And so it feels like bloated, and like there's just like way too much going on. We're doing the Phoenix saga in this one, kind of, but not really. It's got a lot of the same elements of the Phoenix saga in here, but it's very, very different from the comics. But then the actual main plot is about this mutant cure that has been developed. It's this drug that makes mutants into humans. It suppresses the mutant X gene so that they just don't have powers anymore and they're just regular humans. And all of the various political and social implications of introducing that mechanic into this world. A lot of this movie is about characters just like debating whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing, and like what the implications of that are. Magneto's like, okay, like and there's arguments on both sides that are interesting, and each character has their own perspective, and that stuff I think is actually really interesting. Like there's this moment between Storm and Rogue is like excited and into the idea of there being a cure, because her whole deal is that she can't touch people without them fucking dying. So she's like, that sounds great, I would love to have a cure, please. Versus like Storm, who is like offended by the very idea of there being a cure, or calling it a cure. She's like, what the fuck are you talking about? There's nothing to cure. There's nothing wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with being a mutant. It's offensive that they would even try to create such a thing and market it in that way. And you totally get her point of view as well, because obviously this is like a speculative science fiction type concept, so there's not really a real world analogy to it. Like it's very reminiscent of certain things, which I'll get into in a sec, but it's not like a one-to-one to anything. But just conceptually of creating a drug that can alter someone's DNA on the level that it functionally makes them into an entirely different classifiable species, like that's genetic manipulation that's like super insane, and the implications of that are really fucking scary. Like, that's sort of why Storm's perspective is so important, because it's like, she's like, okay, sure, now they're trying to cure mutants, which arguably is not something that, you could call, like, I'm just using that term because that's the term that's in the movie, but even that, like, doesn't feel right because it's, like, kind of gross. But, like, if you can genetically alter someone on that level, like, what's the, what would the implications be if they decided to change, like, to cure, like, blackness, let's say, right? Like, it's not a huge step, it's not a huge leap in logic to see, like, if this were applied to a different minority group, then it suddenly sounds super fucked up. It's like people trying to cure autism and that kind of thing. It's like, well, there's nothing wrong with people that have autism. They're just a little bit different than everyone else, which is fine. But then you kind of also get Rogue's perspective, because she's like, well, I didn't choose to be like this, and I don't want to be like this. I didn't choose the body I was born into. And if I had a choice, which apparently now I do, I would not choose to be like this. And it's like, yeah, kind of fair. I kind of see where you're coming from. And that's where Rogue ultimately lands. She ends up taking the cure, and it's shown to be like an empowering moment for her. Like, she finally gets to have control over her own body and her own life, which I think is kind of a cool idea. It doesn't fully land for me, mostly just because it's very different from comic book Rogue, and what I feel like I personally would have liked to see more is to have a moment where Rogue actually gets to, like, kick ass and join the team. Like, in these movies, Rogue never really gets to use her powers in, like, a cool, heroic way, and I find that a little bit disappointing. Like, obviously we don't do the whole thing where she takes Captain Marvel's powers and now she's flying around and super strong, like in the 90s X-Men show, where she's, like, one of the heavy hitters of the team, which is fine. But there's also lots of other uses of her character that I think could be really cool and interesting. Like this is something that is sort of established in these movies, but to a lesser extent. And it depends on the version, but often when she takes people's powers, she can also take their memories. And so there's, like, all kinds of, like, character drama that you can pull from that. There's a really cool episode of X-Men Evolution where she has, at this point, taken the memories of both, or taken the powers of both Nightcrawler and Mystique, and then she gets this, like, flashback memory of Nightcrawler being born, and she's like, oh, that's interesting, this must be, like, a repressed memory of Nightcrawler. Somehow he remembered he was born, but then later we find out that it's actually Mystique's memory, because in this version, Mystique is Nightcrawler's mom, and so there's, like, all this character drama that pulls from that. It's like, there's a lot of interesting stuff you could do with Rogue's powers that I feel like they never really do in the movies, and so, like, on that level, I'm kind of, like, a little bit disappointed with how the character ends up, but it also kind of fits the story they're telling. Like, there's a moment in X-Men 97 where Jean Grey is about to give birth, so they go to a hospital, but the hospital won't admit them because they're mutants. So Rogue's like, okay, I'm taking over, and she absorbs the, like, memories and talents of one of the doctors there, and is like, okay, now I know how to deliver a baby, so here we go. And it's cool. I want to see more stuff like that. Like, and one of the other things that is, like, kind of fun about this one is that, like, now that we're, like, later on in this timeline, the younger generations of mutants that we've seen as just students for the past couple of movies are now, like, joining the team. So I want to see, like, Rogue join the team, but we don't really see that happen because she goes and stops being a mutant, which is fine, but it's just like, I kind of wanted to see her join the team. So instead we have a lot of stuff with Bobby in this movie, which is good. Kitty Pryde finally gets, like, to be in this one. She's technically in the first two, but it's really just, like, a weird cameo. And she's played by two different actors in both movies, and then in this one she's played by Elliot Page, and Kitty gets to be, like, a full character in this one, and there's, like, a love triangle between her and Bobby and Rogue, which is fine, but it feels a little weird because, like, Kitty hasn't really been a character in the first two movies, and now she suddenly gets all this screen time. Colossus is also in this one. He had, like, a brief appearance in the second one, but now he's more of a
full character, but also not really. He's like really in the background, which is like, I kind of want to see more from Colossus, but also there's like so many characters in this movie that, and so much going on, and it's not that long. It's like under 2 hours somehow. Somehow this movie's short of the next two, and there's like way more going on. I haven't even got to any of the Jean Grey Phoenix stuff yet. But anyway, some of that stuff I think is fun. I like the stuff with Bobby. I like his little, how he gets a little fight scene with Pyro, like putting a bow on that little subplot. That stuff is good, but I wish some of the X-Men that joined the team in this one were like more present in the previous movie so that it like felt like more of a big deal. So Rogue's whole perspective is kind of interesting because it's sort of like a, well, it's my body, my choice. Like, I am choosing this for myself, and I find that empowering, and that's kind of interesting. But then, of course, we get into Magneto's perspective, and he's like, yeah, for now it's voluntary, but as soon as they find a mutant they don't like, they're gonna use it. They're gonna use it against them. They're gonna turn it into a weapon, and then, of course, they do. They invent these like mutant cure guns that just shoot like the little. It's funny because they don't even look like trank guns or anything. They look like sci-fi guns that just shoot like injection needles. Like they just shoot like vaccines at people. It's like this is this is what the anti-vaxxers were warning us about. So Magneto's now like, okay, this is it. Enough fucking around. Let's full out war. Let's go. The first two movies are always talking about like there's a war coming between mutants and humans and stuff, and this one is like, it's here. Like the war is happening, and I'm kind of into that. I'm kind of into how like big and bombastic this movie is. And it's like big epic action, huge big battle scene, huge exaggerated melodrama, and it's like we're going all out in this one. The scene where Magneto takes the Golden Gate Bridge and brings it to Alcatraz. Love that shit. It's very Rise of the Planet of the Apes, and I'm into it. I'm a simple man. I like it when the Golden Gate Bridge gets destroyed. Magneto really gets a lot of time to shine in this one because he's like, I'm going full villain mode. Like let's do this. Let's destroy this cure because it's fucked up, and I'm taking over. Like let's go. A lot of this stuff with Magneto and the whole like cure subplot, I'm really into. I think it's all really interesting and really fun. Magneto just going full villain mode is great. And again, one of the things I really like about Magneto is he's never unprovoked. Like he's always reacting to something or retaliating to something. He's like, they're the ones that came up with this mutant cure thing, and then they put it into a gun. So, which is what I said was going to happen. So like, I'm taking over now. But then on the other side of this movie, they're also doing the Dark Phoenix saga, just also in this movie that's already got so much going on. And it's rushed and not executed well. It's very different from the comics, and it's like, it's weirdly paced, and it's like just like another thing happening on top of everything else going on. So Cyclops goes to Brood, where Jean died in the last movie, and then Jean comes back and kills him off screen. Then she gets brought back to the mansion and makes out with Wolverine, which is pretty hot, I'm not gonna lie. But then they're like, wait a minute, what happened to Scott? Jean is like, oh, I'm crazy and evil now. She's alive again. And then out of nowhere they establish that Jean has this other dark personality called the Phoenix that Xavier locked away in her mind, and that's what's coming out now, and it's bad news bears for the X-Boys. Then Xavier dies like halfway through this movie. Jean just fucking kills him because I guess she loses control or something. It's not paced super well, and it's also just not executed very well, and it's confusing why this is happening on top of this other entirely different plot that they have going on. I guess I know it's because they set it up in the last movie, but it feels like the movie really wants to be more about the cure stuff, which I think is far more interesting anyways. They try to tie it into these like themes of power and power, absolute power corrupting absolutely and stuff like that. She's become too powerful that she can't be controlled and stuff. Wolverine has to stab her at the end, and it's this like the most melodramatic thing ever. He's like, because she's just like disintegrating people left and right at this point. And Wolverine's like, I'm the only one who can heal fast enough to not be disintegrated to get close enough to her to stab her. But at the same time, it feels kind of weird that this movie, like that he's like, it's the only way, I have to kill her. It's weird that this movie that also has the like, oh, by the way, there's also this drug that you can inject people with and it'll take away their mutant powers, and the thing that is causing Jean to go crazy is that she's too powerful, but nobody even like thinks to attempt that on her. They just are like, Wolverine's just like, guess I gotta kill her. And like the only reason that I can think of that it is that way, that might have happened in the comics at one point. I can't remember. Jean's died a few times in the comics and comes back often because she's the Phoenix or whatever. So that might have been from the comics. I can't remember. If not, but in the context of the movie, it feels like the main reason is just that because it would be super dramatic if that happened. And it's like, yeah, you're right. And that's kind of the vibe of this movie, is it's like, it's more dumber and more goofier, and more just like big dumb blockbuster, more schlocky. That's a good way of putting it. Where like X-Men 2, it like everything is big and cool action and great characters, but like there's like a story to it too. Like every character has like a little arc that's satisfying and interesting. The villain is cool. Like it's just it's got big cool action, but it's like supported by interesting characters as well. Or X-Men 3, everything is just more schlocky. Even Wolverine is a lot more of a cartoon in this one. Like, he felt like a real three-dimensional person in the first two movies, and then in this one he's just like, whatever, bub, I like smoking cigars and stabbing people. There's not much more to me than that. And it's like, well, there was in the first two, but okay. I do like that Storm gets to do a lot more in this one. Mostly just because Scott gets killed off screen and Jean is crazy now, and then Xavier dies halfway through, so Storm is suddenly the leader of the X-Men. I also like her new haircut. It's great. It's a great look. She's looking better than she has in the first two. It's not necessarily like more accurate to any version of Storm from the comics, but it fits the vibe better. And I think it's just that they let Halle Berry like be Halle Berry and be hot and cool. And it's like, yeah, that's Storm. So yeah, like it's kind of the best Storm that we've gotten so far, because she's actually like involved in everything that's happening. I do like that we get a big battle at the end of this one, but I don't know if I'm a huge fan of the ending, because I think it's like, it's trying to do a lot of things, and I feel like it doesn't really have an answer to the question of like, what do we do about this cure? Like, I don't really know where the movie lands on it. Towards the end of this battle, they defeat Magneto, which I kind of like. Colossus throws Wolverine at him. We get a little fastball special. That's a move from the comics they do all the time, which is just a distraction so that Beast can get in place and come up from behind Magneto and stab him with the cure. So now Magneto's lost his powers, which is like the greatest like defeat he could ever have. It's kind of heartbreaking, like, and that's a huge part of that is just Ian McKellen's performance. Like, he just plays it fully straight and is devastated that he's become human. It's like tragic and epic in all the best ways, but at the same time, it's like, well, what is? I start to ask, well, then what does that mean for like the themes of this movie? Because there's like a lot of stuff about power and what power means, what power corrupts, who gets to have power. This cure is trying to take away power from people, but then Rogue kind of finds it empowering to have that option for herself because she gets to choose it. There's a lot of stuff about like choice and stuff in this one. And then Magneto gets the cure forced upon him in order to defeat him. So Magneto is proven right. Like he loses the movie, but in doing so he gets proven right. Yeah, it's like so tragic for him because it's like far worse than just killing Magneto. Is leaving him alive as a human is like the worst possible outcome for him personally. But it proves him right that he's like, see, this is what I told you would happen. This is that they would force this upon mutants. They're afraid of our power and they took it from us. Like, so what is the movie saying about that? I guess is my question. Like, the cure is okay, but it's kind of scary if it's forced upon you, unless that mutant is really bad, and then we're okay with doing that. It's like, well, that just proves Magneto's point then. And that's the other thing that's like a little bit weird, is that like Magneto's going all out on destroying this facility that is holding there's this mutant kid there whose mutant power is that he can take away other mutants' powers when they get close to him. So they're using his blood or whatever to create this cure that suppresses the mutant gene from mutants. So he's held captive on Alcatraz Island, which is like already like so loaded thematically and like it's just very provocative. And they even say something like, oh, this prison used to be where we held people we didn't like, but now it's going to be a place of freedom, except for this kid that we're holding hostage here against his will until we can reproduce enough of his blood or whatever to cure all of the mutants we don't like or who are voluntarily doing it. Like it's one of those things where it's like, the more you think about it, the more Magneto just kind of seems right. And, like, he's not going there to rescue that kid. He's going there to kill him so that they can stop producing this thing. But it's still, like, fucked up that they have him there at all. And then the X-Men are like, we're going to team up with the military and the government to protect this child prisoner. and this drug that's changing the biology of people against their will, that they've now turned into a weapon, and we're going to team up with them to fight Magneto. There's a little more to it than that, because it's like Magneto's like, once we stop this cure from existing, like, I'm fed up with this shit, we're taking over. This is the only thing that can stop us, so we're going to destroy that, and then we're taking over the world. So, like, I get that there's, like, he's got a more evil super villain, super plan to take over the world or whatever, which is fine. But, like, it feels weird that outside of just the fact that Magneto's, like, killing people and stuff, besides that, all his points, like, I get that he's taking his ideology too far or whatever, but I don't know, I feel like he's kind of right. Am I crazy here? Because that's the other thing. There's like all these scenes of like the president and the military like trying to figure out how to stop Magneto and stuff, and we're supposed to see that stuff from, like, because Magneto's the bad guy, we got to see like that stuff. I guess we're supposed to see that stuff from as the president and the government as like the good guys, but like it doesn't really come across that way. Even Beast is like not really into that. Like when they first tell him about this cure that's invented, he's like, do you guys realize the implications of this? It's like, it's such a fucking slippery slope. Like as soon as you know, you just need one person and not to have this used against their will, and like then that happens with the first use of the vaccine gun that shoots Mystique, and then she turns back into human, and Magneto's like, well, you're not one of us anymore, and he leaves her, and it's fucking heartbreaking and brutal and a cold as fuck move from Magneto, but you also kind of feel bad for him because he's like, you're like, oh, my friend, like, to in my mind, my friend is dead now. Like, he has a line like, oh, it's so sad, she was so beautiful, or something like that, and it's like, oh. But then, yeah, Beast is like, what the fuck, President? Then you made guns out of this thing, and the president's immediately like, that was an isolated incident, and I'm like, okay, sure. So then, like, at the end of the movie, they're like, and I guess we have peace now, or whatever, and we're gonna start a new age of mutants and humans working together. They let the kid go and let him live at the Xavier mansion. Storm is like, I'm going to take over leading the X-Men and leading the school. And they're like, I guess we have, Beast gets a promotion in the government or whatever. And it's like, I guess we have peace now or whatever. And I get that we have to, like, have some kind of concludingness to this movie, because it was sort of pitched as like the final battle and stuff, and we do conclude a lot of major arcs for a lot of the big characters. We defeat Magneto for good this time, except, well, maybe he'll come back. And like, Xavier, and it's this big epic battle. A lot of main characters die or get depowered. But the way that the movie wraps up, it kind of feels like, well, now that we've killed or depowered all of the radicalized mutants and Magneto, I guess there are no more bad mutants in the world, and therefore there will be no more conflict between human and mutant kind. The end. And it's like, really? I feel like that would just further, like, oh, look at all the mutants they killed during this, during Magneto's, like, fight for freedom. Like, I feel like that could just radicalize other people further. But whatever. I get that you have to conclude the movie somehow. Oh yeah, there's like a couple other funny things. Like in this one, you have all these like Hot Topic mutants that join Magneto, and they're funny because they're like so goofy, but they're like take themselves so seriously. And there's this one that's like, I can tell every mutant's power level, and she starts talking about like, oh, Magneto, you're above a class 3 mutant or whatever, which is like not been a thing in the previous 2 movies up to this point, which is fine if it's like just this one character. But then in like a couple scenes later, Xavier's talking about Jean Grey, and he's like, she's the only class 5 mutant that I've ever come across. And you're like, what are you talking about? Since when was there different classes of mutant? Since this movie? And everyone's just like talking about it like it's always been a thing. To be fair, it's kind of a thing in the comics. Mostly you just hear about Omega level mutants, which are like mutants with some unknown or uncalculable limit on their power. So yeah, mutants like Jean Grey are Omega level because like she's telekinetic and she can move shit with her mind. So the limits on that seemingly endless. But like characters like Magneto fit into this as well. Storm, because she can control the weather, and like what are the limits on that? Who knows? But then you don't really hear about other different classes of mutant. It's more just like Omega and then whatever's below that, which is fine. Which is a little bit less goofy. But it's more the fact that they like treat it like it's always been a thing, and it hasn't been a thing in the first 2 movies, so it just comes off as weird. I do kind of really like the opening scene where we do a flashback of Xavier and Magneto back when they were still friends working together. They meet Jean Grey in person when she's a little kid, and it's like a solid scene. And then it like comes back later because they go and meet Jean Grey again at her house, but she's gone fucking crazy. Oh yeah, and they like CGI de-age them a bit, and I gotta be honest, it looked pretty good. Like, at the very least, it looks about as good as the modern de-aging technology is, which is, very, very good, but still a little bit uncanny, and that's this. Like, it's about as good as that. Like, it really impressed me. I don't know if they've done, like, a special edition of this movie or something, or, like, remastered it or anything, but I don't think so. But it looked really good. I don't know. Or at least it looked pretty good. It looked as good as the current technology is. The one in X-Men Origins Wolverine of de-aged Xavier looks fucking awful. But that's a different movie. All the effects in that movie are not good, so that tracks. Anyways, so X-Men Last Stand, not as bad as people say. I think it has a lot of really, really interesting ideas. I don't think they're necessarily fleshed out perfectly. Like, I don't think it all wraps up in a neat little bow. But it's interesting to debate and think about. And at the heart of it, like, that's kind of what X-Men is about, is like touching on different social issues, but changing it enough that it's kind of its own thing. But it's still very like provocative and very reminiscent of a lot of real world tensions and real world issues and politics and all those kind of things. The Jean Grey Phoenix stuff is really rushed and really not executed well, but I don't know. Everything else in this movie is kind of interesting enough that I'm still kind of into it. It's at the very least a way better movie than many of the future X-Men movies that get way worse. So in like retrospect, not that bad. Okay, I need to move on to other movies. Yeah.
We're gonna be doing one thing and one thing only. Killing Nazis.
X-Men First Class. Next one we're talking about. Skipping Origins Wolverine, because that movie is really, really bad. I rewatched it a couple years ago, and it is so much worse than I remembered. It's truly, truly an awful film. People talk about lots of different movies are bad. Origins Wolverine, one of the worst ones ever. It's atrocious. Anyways, X-Men First Class. This one's pretty good. My feelings on it have been pretty consistent throughout. I really like it. I really like a lot of stuff about it. I have a couple small nitpicks that really bug me, but in the grand scheme of things aren't really much of a big deal. But overall, it's really solid. So this one's an origin prequel, kind of, except the continuity doesn't make a lot of sense if you think about it. So it's best if you don't. We get to meet young Xavier and young Magneto before they were the guys they are in the later movies, and went back when they were friends and working together, and they have to stop World War III and do the Cuban Missile Crisis. And all of that stuff, I think, is really solid. James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender both do really great jobs as these characters. As usual, Magneto's one of the standouts. It's really fun to see him hunting down Nazis and killing them. And the whole bit with the coin just fucking rules. It's so cool. This movie is also one of the only ones where we get to see Xavier actually, like, training and teaching his X-Men, which is like the thing that he always claims that he does. He's like, oh yes, the X-Men were students of mine, and then like we never see that except for in this movie where we get a whole big training montage of them like learning to use their powers and practicing and getting better at them, and Xavier helps them to learn and to grow, and that stuff is all really great. I kind of wish we got even more of it. It's because it's mostly just in this one montage. The montage is really good. But I would like even more. Some of my problems with this movie come with, one, there's some continuity stuff that doesn't line up with the other movies, which is not necessarily a bad thing, depending on how you look at it. And two, I think the ending is kind of rushed. Mostly with how they kind of try to condense like everything about Charles and Magneto's origin into like one singular moment during this whole Cuban Missile Crisis thing. I think is kind of messy and doesn't quite work. Magneto goes full villain mode, puts on the Magneto helmet, and tries to blow up all of the US and Russian guys because they fired on them. In Magneto's defense, once again, he's acting in retaliation. The humans all teamed up to try to blow up all the mutants on this random beach in Cuba, and so he stops all their missiles and then turns them back around on the humans, and it's like they started this, so I'm gonna kill them. I really love the Charles being like, but it's not their fault, they're just following orders, and Magneto's like, not good enough, never again. That stuff all fucking rules. And then Rose Byrne shoots at Magneto and he deflects the bullet and it paralyzes Charles. And then that becomes their like falling out moment. Magneto's like, well, all the bad mutants come with me. And then they leave. And it just feels kind of rushed. I do think the how it should have ended summed this one up pretty well. The main thing that I think is frustrating to me is that I think I would prefer like a whole other movie of this team of like Charles and Magneto working together. I think you could even build it out to like a full trilogy of them working as a team before Magneto is like, I've had enough of your shit, Charles, and leaves, because it doesn't feel as tragic of a friendship falling apart as I feel like it should, because it feels like they've really only known each other for like a few weeks in this movie, and they're like friends, sure. I love the scene where the Rage and Serenity scene where Charles helps Magneto remember this like beautiful moment of him and his mom, and then he's able to move the satellite dish, and then he's able to lift the sub later. All that stuff is great. It's so good. I just want to see more of Charles and Magneto together, and that's why I think it's frustrating to me that they like rush their falling out at the end of this movie. Obviously this also like really doesn't line up at all with the continuity of the earlier movies with Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen. The way they talk about the relationship, it sounds like they had been friends for years, and then only in recent times Magneto has gone full villain. And we even see a flashback in the third X-Men movie of Charles and Magneto still working together, Charles still walking around, and they're like going together to meet Jean Grey. And obviously none of that is like possible with this new origin, which is fine. This movie kind of works a little bit better with, if you don't think about it, how it connects too much, although it is obviously still trying to be kind of connected. Wolverine has a cameo. Several of the characters set up in this movie, like Beast and Mystique, are major players in the later movies, or at least Mystique is. And going off that, one of the other things I find a little bit frustrating about this movie is that a lot of the major things that are related to both Charles and Magneto are like built and designed by other characters, and then they just happen to like co-opt them. So like first of all this is like discontinuity. This is discontinuity with the first couple X-Men movies. In the first two X-Men movies, they like mention multiple times that Magneto helped Charles to build Cerebro, and that's why, one, he knows how it works, and two, he's able to find a way to shield himself from it, that being his helmet. So like it's kind of weird that in X-Men First Class, not only did Xavier and Magneto not build Cerebro together, but Xavier didn't even build Cerebro at all. It was something that Beast and the CIA had in the works just in case they ever met a psychic. And it's like, that's pretty fucking convenient. And then the Magneto helmet, too, is just something that Kevin Bacon, the villain of this movie, had cooking. Which does make sense for why he would have it, because he already has a psychic on his team, and so he would want a way to defend himself from that just in case she ever turned on him. And then it coincidentally also protects him from Charles as well. I do like the design of the helmet. It is obviously a lot more comic accurate than Ian McKellen's helmet, although Ian McKellen's version still looks like he's just able to pull it off, even though it doesn't look that good. It kind of works when he's wearing it. Yeah, so it's just like a little bit convenient that there was this other guy who also developed a helmet that can protect you from psychics, and then it happened to be Magneto's helmet, and he just stole it from this other guy. Like it's just a little. I just think it's a little more interesting if it's something that Magneto specifically comes up with himself, versus another guy, and then Magneto's like, that's a pretty good idea, I'm gonna steal it. And this kind of goes into like the idea that I feel like they're kind of rushing through a lot of the origin elements so that we can cram them all into this one movie. Like this was also like sort of a soft reboot for the X-Men franchise at this point. They had done the trilogy. Origins Wolverine was successful, but like financially, but critically panned. So, and where did we go from there? Do we just keep doing origin movies with other characters, or what exactly? And so I can see them being like, this might be a one and done kind of situation, so let's just like have it wrap up and put our characters where they need to be at the end of this origin story, so that it kind of lines up with where we see them at the start of X1. So, yeah, I don't know. One of the other weird things about this movie is that, to me, this movie feels like kind of misogynistic based on the female characters that are present in it. Let's do a rundown. We have a girl who pretends to be a stripper, a girl who dresses like a stripper, an actual stripper, and then a girl whose arc is to strip. This is all, very plot relevant stuff, I'm sure. It's all, really important to the plot to have these characters be in their underwear or naked for a good chunk of this movie. This is all important plot relevant things. I'm not necessarily complaining about having like sexy characters in something. I just would like the characters to also be like a little bit more deep than that. Mystique, in fairness, does have a lot more complexity to her. I think Jennifer Lawrence does a pretty good job in this one. She does feel a little bit uncomfortable in the Mystique makeup in a way that Rebecca Romijn never did. Like, she was always just fully confident in who she was, which is what made that character work. However, Jennifer Lawrence being uncomfortable in her blue Mystique form actually does kind of work for her arc in this movie. So I'm okay with it. It's more frustrating in later movies when like she clearly just didn't want to be there and she barely appears in the blue makeup, even though for her character arc she should be in it pretty much the whole time by the point of the later movies. I also kind of really like the scene of the meme scene of I prefer the real Raven. It's solid. It's a solid scene and a great meme format. Good stuff. But outside of her, the other female characters are extremely underwritten. Emma Frost should be way more cool than she is in this movie. She kind of gets done dirty. It also sucks that she like doesn't really come back after this point. Like, that's kind of another frustrating thing I think about this movie is I do like the main X-Men team that we get in this movie, and then like pretty much none of them come back, or they get like killed off screen in the next movie, and that is lame, and I don't like it. Another kind of weird thing about this movie is like, so they set up all these new mutants that are going to form the X-Men team. And then the only one of the whole movie that they kill off, other than Kevin Bacon, who's the villain, is the one black guy. And it's like, come on. I don't know. There's just like kind of weird stuff like that in this movie. However, it is still a lot of fun. And I think that really helps make up for some of its shortcomings. Is this movie's just like very fun to watch. It's fun to see Magneto killing Nazis. It's fun to see the X-Men form as a team and learn to use their powers and all of that stuff. I think Matthew Vaughn is a really good director when he has a good script. And this script is pretty good. There's a lot of stuff in this movie that is like very 60s Cold War Cuban Missile Crisis centric. That is like the basic main plot. And that, I think, ends up taking up a lot of the screen time. And it's like kind of interesting and kind of fun as like a different setting. We get to have like 60s costuming and set design and things like that. And there's some fun ideas there. I like, yeah, and obviously, and it's tying into some of the ideas from the original comics, which were written in the early 60s. The Children of the Atom were playing up that idea that these are like the fact that the US and Russia have both been like stockpiling nukes and experimenting with nuclear weaponry and nuclear power and stuff has kind of the extra radiation of that has sort of helped to accelerate the mutations of the X-Men and whatever. I think that's kind of fun. But however, the timeline, like from this point going forward, just gets more and more complicated as they both try to tie it in with other historical things and also like jump forward a lot of years each movie for some reason. This timeline also ends up, we get like 4 whole movies from this specific cast, which is kind of crazy because it's kind of more than we got of the original movies, unless you count either the Wolverine movies or if you count Days of Future Past as part of the original characters as like a I don't know what I'm saying. There's a lot of X-Men movies, I guess is my point, and this like soft reboot series ends up going much longer than you would think it would. Oh yeah, at the very end of the movie, Magneto's costume has always bothered me, and I've always thought it looks so stupid. Like, one, the helmet looks, they changed the helmet to look more like the helmet from the comics, like even from earlier, even changing it even from how it looked earlier in this movie. Like, they put the horns on it, which I think the horns look fine in the comics, but I don't know if I'm a big fan of them in live action. But the main thing that doesn't work about this Magneto costume at the end is his dumb shirt and his goofy ass gloves. Like, it just like the costume looks like he spent like $7 on it. It just looks bad, and that's like the final shot of the movie. I don't know why the costume looks so bad, but it does. It makes me laugh every single time, and it's supposed to be like this cool moment. The music in this movie rules. It's sick. The Magneto theme, Raging Serenity, I already talked about. The sublift scene is also great. Yeah, the music is really, really good in this movie. I like it. I do like this one, although there's things that bother me about it. But if you're not thinking too hard about where this one fits continuity-wise, then they're not really that big of a deal. So, yeah, it's good. Good movie.
You asked me to come say goodbye. Sayonara.
Got the Wolverine claw back because we're doing the Wolverine. It's pizza time. It'd been a while since I'd seen this one, and it's actually pretty good. I think it kind of holds up. It's not without its flaws, but I really like the story that it's trying to tell and the themes that it's playing with, and where it fits in the Wolverine trilogy, if you want to call it that. This one's done by James Mangold, who also did Logan, which is the one that's like more good. But this one kind of is also kind of good. So when we get to Logan, that one's basically a Western, and so this one is basically a samurai movie, and Westerns are just American samurai movies. So it actually kind of fits pretty well together. Like, there's kind of a thematic through line to the 2 different James Mangold Wolverine movies, even though they are very different, like, aesthetically. But I kind of really vibe with this movie. I think it's kind of good, actually. And it's not without its flaws, and yes, it's another in the long line of stories about a white guy going to a non-white country and becoming the best warrior among them. It's another, it treads into like white savior trope territory. It's a Last Samurai. It's a 47 Ronin. It's a Shogun, but Shogun is a lot more subversive of those kind of tropes than most of these other types of stories. But I kind of like it anyways. Mostly because Wolverine Logan as just kind of fits that vibe as a character. Now, first of all, this is based on storylines from the comics. Wolverine's spent a bunch of time in Japan, and it has a bunch of different characters that he's interacted through those adventures. So this is taking from that stuff. Silver Samurai is the main bad guy in this movie, though the way they do him specifically is very strange and not that good. But a lot of the other stuff I really, really vibe with. As he's described in this movie, he's a Ronin. He's a samurai without a cause or a purpose. He's a soldier without a master, a soldier without a war. In this one, it seems like he just has all of his memories back because he remembers stuff from World War II. I don't know when that happened exactly, but I don't know. Maybe it was in between movies or something. I remember being very surprised that Famke Jensen, I don't know how to pronounce her name, is back as Jean Grey's ghost in this movie. Like, that's the only returning X-Men character, like other than Hugh Jackman, and I was pretty surprised that they got her to come back, also because she's dead. But I actually really like the whole arc with that Wolverine is going through in this one, of like the repeating trauma of both like his PTSD from being in every major war of the last 2 centuries, as well as like everyone he loves ends up dying in some way, either because he's basically immortal and so he'll just outgrow them and outlive them, or B, because he's some kind of monster killer and he's the Wolverine, and either he ends up killing them directly or he feels at fault for them dying. Like, this one actually has like pretty consistent theming across taking stuff from across Origins Wolverine, X-Men 3 The Last Stand, and then this movie, and then it leads into Logan thematically as well. It's kind of good. This movie's good. Like, he keeps having these nightmares of him killing Jean, but he first imagines like that he's sleeping next to Jean, and that it's this weird like, you killed me, but also don't you kind of wish you were dead like I am also. But it also is like a parallel to Origins Wolverine, when he was with his wife in that movie, and I'm forgetting the character's name, but they have like a similar scene where he has like PTSD nightmares from all the wars he was in, and he keeps like almost stabbing her to death. Kind of similar how he almost fucking stabbed Rogue to death in the first X-Men 2. This guy has a problem with almost killing or successfully killing people that he's close to, and so like you kind of get why he's like why he keeps falling back on, I need to not be around people anymore, which is how he starts at the beginning of this movie. And then that parallels to later in the movie, when he ends up with the love interest of this movie, whose name is Mariko, which is the same name as the love interest in Shogun. I don't know if that's intentional or coincidental, because I think she's a character from the comics also, so that could just be the character name. I don't remember. I don't really buy the love story in this, and that's kind of a flaw. Like, the main thing is that, like, they're both very attractive, so they have, you know, some physical chemistry from that point of, like, well, they're both hot, so, you know, I kind of want to see them kiss on that level. And the main storyline that they have together is, like, a pretty basic, like, gotta save the princess story, which is fine, because, you know, that story has worked many times, and for a reason. It would be nice if there was, like, a little bit more to it than that. But anyways, he ends up hooking up with Mariko, and then they have this moment where he wakes up from his PTSD nightmares of killing Jean Grey and almost stabs her, but then she kind of, like, calms him down and talks him down, and it's very similar to the same kind of sequence in Origins Wolverine. And then she tells this story about how her grandfather, who's the Silver Samurai guy, he got saved by Logan in World War II when they dropped the nuclear bomb on not Hiroshima, the other one they did. Was that Nagasaki? I should look this up, because this is real world shit and it's important. And Nagasaki was the other one. So yeah, that's the one in this one that they talk about. And that's a whole other theme that is really interesting. But she talks about how her grandfather told stories of the Wolverine who saved her. She calls him by a different name, but it has like he has this like mythological, like, legendary warrior status that again kind of echoes some of the mythology stuff from Origins Wolverine, with his girlfriend in that movie who tells him the story of the Wolverine or whatever. And it's like, it's interesting. I don't know if it, like, Origins Wolverine is still a bad movie and it doesn't really work, but I'm kind of like vibing on how this movie takes similar thematic stuff and reinterprets it and reproduces it. And that's kind of like the whole theme of this movie, is that Logan is like trapped in the curse of being immortal. And what is it like to live like that? What is it like to
never die. And wouldn't it be kind of easier for him to have a mortal life and to be able to die? And so this movie like plays with that idea. And yeah, so then part of this movie he gets weakened by this weird bug that's in his chest and leeching off his heart, so he's not healing as fast as normal. He must be still healing a little bit because he gets shot a bunch and doesn't die, so that would normally kill a person. So he has a taste of what it's like to be mortal, and that's kind of interesting. Like there's a scene where they're in this like village somewhere, and he ends up like helping chop down this tree, and then he has to have like a sit down after. Mariko's like, are you all right? And he's like, yeah, I'm tired. I've never been tired before. Like physically after doing something exhaustive. Like I've never experienced that. And it's like, that's interesting. That's kind of cool. The train fight in this movie is so fucking good. I've talked about this before in my superhero train fights video. Check that out if you haven't already. But it rules. It's so good. It's easily the best action sequence in the movie, and I wish it was longer, but it is still really awesome. They're on this bullet train, and Wolverine's trying to like get these guys, but the like physics of how fast they're going is the biggest challenge. There's this great part where they have to like jump a bit because there's like they're on top of the train and there's stuff like flying by them, and so there's moments where they have to like jump to avoid getting hit, and then there's this awesome part where Wolverine like tricks the guy into jumping and then he jumps and just gets fucking whacked by a thing. It's amazing. It's incredible. And yeah, it's just a great action sequence. And it's another thing that I love about it also is that it's done mostly without dialogue. It's just all visually acting, and it's brilliant. Hugh Jackman, one of the things that makes him great about Wolverine, him as Wolverine, is that he's really good at portraying like being in pain, because they're constantly putting him in like horrifyingly painful situations because he can heal from it, so he'll be fine, and he just always gives it 1,000,000%. He's great. He's great as Wolverine. I know that's not a hot take, but it's true. Hiroyuki Sanada is in this one. He's in every American movie where you need a Japanese guy. Was recently like the main guy in Shogun, and he's excellent in that series. He was also in Last Samurai. He was also in Bullet Train. He was in John Wick 4. He was in Endgame briefly. That one time that Hawkeye had to fight a ninja. They're like, Hiroyuki Sanada, want to come be in this movie for 1 minute? And he's like, yep, I'll be there. He's in this movie too, and he's really good. I almost didn't recognize him because he doesn't have facial hair in this one, but that just kind of shows the range of his skill. He's really talented, and I love seeing him in stuff. He's good at sword fights, and he's great. He's really good. Of course, Wolverine kicks his ass because he's immortal, but other than that, and that kind of leads into like one of the more problems with this movie. It does sort of fall apart towards the third act, but there's also just kind of a lot going on, like way too much going on. There's just a few too many characters. The main thing is with like they think the main relationship is supposed to be Wolverine and Mariko, who's like the heir to this big company. And then her grandfather is the Silver Samurai guy who Wolverine saved in World War II back in the day. And now he has this huge empire, and he's going to leave it all to his granddaughter. And so then there's like all these different people that have reasons for being into that or not into that. And it gets convoluted and complicated. It's confusing too because his whole plan is that he wants to convince Wolverine to give up. He thinks he's discovered a way to steal Wolverine's healing factor and give it to himself. And he's like, I'm old now, but I still don't want to die. And your curse is that you can't die. So I think we can work something out. But then he fakes his death, which is kind of confusing. And then he shows up at the very end of the movie in a big CGI robot suit and forcefully tries to steal Wolverine's healing from him, which is also confusing because there was a different thing that made him start to lose his healing earlier in the movie, and then where he had this little bug on his heart, but then he figured that out and got rid of it, so now he has his healing back. But then the guy chops his claws off and starts drilling into his bone claws underneath the metal, which is another like, oh, that feels like that would be excruciatingly horrible. And then he's able to suck out his healing through that, I guess. But it's like, you were kind of close to convincing him to willingly give it up, and then you face your death. So it's like weird. It's weirdly convoluted and doesn't really make it much sense. And then, yeah, the movie kind of devolves into another superhero movie where the hero has to fight a big gray CGI thing at the end. It's giving Michael Bay Shredder vibes. And, yeah, it doesn't look great, and it's not really the Silver Samurai from the comics. It's also kind of weird because, so the poster has like Wolverine holding a samurai sword, but he never really does that in the movie. He holds this like big mechanical samurai sword that the bad guy has, because he like drops one of his swords at the end, and he fights the big robot samurai with that at the end. But he never holds like a regular samurai sword, which is kind of, I feel like, a missed opportunity. But whatever, there's enough other things going on in this movie. Brian T is in this movie briefly. He's the fiance of Mariko. He gets thrown into a pool, and it's pretty fun. I only mention him because he's from Tokyo Drift, and he's the DK.
You know what DK stands for? Donkey Kong. Drift King.
And I think it's funny that he's here. Then there's like another ninja guy who is Mariko's ex-boyfriend. A lot of different characters in this movie, and he's here too. He has a bow and arrow, and he's working with Logan some of the time, but then he turns against him later, but then he turns back around. It's like, it's unnecessarily complicated. And I haven't even mentioned Yukio, who's the one that we actually like. She's the cool redhead ninja lady who goes to recruit Wolverine at the beginning of the movie. And she's fun and cool. She has the ability to see someone's death, which is like a plot point because she doesn't see Silver Samurai die, which is why we know that he's actually alive still. But then later in the movie, she sees Logan's death, and it's vague enough. Here's what's interesting. It's slightly vague enough that you could interpret it as how he dies in Logan, and I'm not sure if they like thought about that while they were making Logan, or if it just happened to work out that way. But it kind of works, and I kind of love it. There's different edits you can find on YouTube, but basically the gist of her prediction is like, you're on your back covered in blood, and that part is like, well, you know, that could be any number of situations that Wolverine finds himself in. And then you're holding your heart in your hand, but it kind of fits Logan a little bit, and I think that's kind of cool. Let's pretend it was intentional, and I kind of like it. But she's really cool, and she's not in the movie enough because Wolverine has to spend his time with this other character who he has to fall in love with, and I kind of like some of the stuff thematically for Logan's character arc, but I don't really buy that like romantic relationship exactly. But I really like Logan and Yukio together. I think they're a fun pairing. I think they have pretty good chemistry, and I like just her being like, yeah, I'm your bodyguard, like I'm on board now, I want to hang out with you. And she like joins him to go on adventures at the end of the movie, and then we never see her again, and it's like, oh, I wish that she came back in one of these movies. Like, at the very least, it would be cool if she was in Days of Future Past, and maybe she gets killed off early on by, like, a Sentinel or something, and that's like, oh no, the stakes are getting higher because we're losing X-Men. I don't know, something, but, like, she just never comes back, and that's too bad. And I wish she was in this movie more. I kind of wish the movie was just about her and Logan doing stuff together, and they nixed the romance subplot altogether. But whatever, she's cool for the scenes that she, again, this movie's kind of messy, there's too many characters, there's a little bit too much going on, it gets convoluted, and the third act, it falls apart a little bit, because there's also a character named Viper who's here too, and she's also in the movie, because we have to have another villain, and we have to have Yukio fight someone, I guess. again, that's what I'm saying. There's just a little bit too much going on, but the stuff that does work, I think works really well. And I don't know, it's far from perfect, but it's pretty good and it's better than I remembered. And I kind of like it still. The end credit scene of this one is pretty fun, even though it doesn't make any sense. Because, well, mostly just because we never get an explanation of like how Xavier is back to life. Because remember, he died in the last one, and then suddenly he's just back here, and he's like, "You're not the only one with gifts, Logan," and that's all that we get. They did kind of set up that he was going to come back in some way in a post-credit scene, but that was like, the implication there was that he had put his consciousness into the comatose body of some other guy. But here he just looks like Patrick Stewart again, so I don't know, don't think about it, I guess. Also, Logan loses his adamantium claws in this one, and then so then his bone claws grow back. And then in Days of Future Past, he just has the metal claws again, don't think about it. So, I don't know. I kind of like this movie, and it's not perfect, but I still kind of like it anyways, because samurais are fun. Next movie.
In 1973, I looked a lot like James McAvoy.
X-Men Days of Future Past. Gotta go back to the future, to the past. This one is really great. My main problem with it is I think that it means that the X-Men series like kind of peaks too early because they didn't really build up to this movie at all, which is fine. But then there's nowhere to go afterwards because the heights of this one are like so high, and we bring back like so many characters, and then there's nothing to do after. The X-Men movies had never had the same like long form planning of the Avengers like Infinity Saga or anything to that level. Like they did their trilogy, and then that kind of concludes, and then immediately after they're like, what do we do now? Prequels? I don't know. And I think at one point there was a plan to like build up to this one a little more and do like one or two more First Class timeline movies with that cast before crossing them over with the original cast of the original trilogy. But that didn't end up happening, and they just kind of jumped straight into Days of Future Past, which is number one, a famous story from the comics. And then number two, a fun excuse to be able to use both versions of the characters that we'd seen before. And it does a pretty good job of balancing all those different ideas and these different characters and making it all work in one mostly cohesive story. This is also where it definitely becomes a lot more apparent that the X-Men timeline doesn't really make any sense if you think about it at all. But don't, and you'll have fun watching with this one. I don't really have a hot take on this one. This one just kind of rules. It's one of those few like big blockbuster superhero movies that kind of lives up to the hype of like the trailer and stuff. Like this is one of the trailers that I rewatched a lot back when I watched trailers. But it's an excellent trailer. They don't give too much away, but they show you we're doing time travel, and all of these different characters are all in the movie somehow, and it's going to be cool. Wolverine, of course, becomes the main character again because he hadn't been the main character for one whole movie, and so we got to bring him back. But I really like what they do here. Number one, he ends up taking more of a back seat once we get into the past timeline stuff with Xavier and Magneto. And number two, the relationship is totally different because this is a older, wiser Wolverine, and Charles is in this like not good place, and so he's the one that is the one that needs help, and Wolverine is able to kind of help him a little bit. And that's kind of a fun way to reinterpret their relationship. It's cool. I really dig drug addict Charles. I think he's great. I think it's a really cool idea to have him be so lost and in this really dark place in his life, because it's so very different from literally every other version of the character that we see. Having the whole arc about him having to learn how to hope again and learn how to be optimistic again is kind of can be kind of cheesy at times, but it totally works for me. It's great. I love it. The Quicksilver scene rules, of course. It does kind of give you a lot more questions than answers. Like, Wolverine's just like, I know a guy, and the guy he knows is Quicksilver. It's like, when did he meet Quicksilver? When did that happen? And that kind of leads me to one of the things that I find a little bit frustrating about this movie. Not that it's bad necessarily, but it feels like such a big jump between where everyone was in the last one to here, that I kind of wish we got a whole other movie of both the first class characters and of the original characters too, because they're all in such a different place now too. Like, this is kind of the point where we also like stop worrying about continuity at all. Like, so the Wolverine ends with Wolverine getting his claws chopped off, so he has the bone claws again. And then there's a post-credit scene setting up the return of both Magneto, who has his powers back, which was kind of set up at the post-credit scene of X-Men 3, so whatever, that's fine. And also Charles is back, because remember, he died in X-Men in The Last Stand. And Wolverine is like notably surprised to see him in that scene. And yes, they sort of set this up in a post-credit scene in The Last Stand. There's like a scene earlier in the movie beforehand where Charles is teaching his class, and he's like, theoretically, if you could put the consciousness of someone into a guy who's in a coma, what would be like the ethics of that? Anyways, on to the next thing, and then that doesn't come up again until after the credits. Where there's a scene that implies that Charles has like somehow put his consciousness into the body of a different guy. Okay, that doesn't explain how Patrick Stewart is back, and that's me giving the post-credit scenes that barely explain anything like more credit than they probably deserve. But don't worry, because it'll all be explained by Days of Future Past, where they don't address it at all. Charles is just back, Magneto's back, he's got his powers, Wolverine just has his adamantium claws again. Don't think about it and don't question it. However, I really don't care that much, because this movie's really fun. And it's cool to see all these characters back again. It's fun to see Charles and Magneto like finally working together on the same team. There's some really great action scenes in the future timeline, mostly just in the way that they use different characters' powers. We get a lot of really great stuff with Blink's portal, thinking with portals, and I like all that stuff. And Bobby gets to do the Iceman slide, and he goes full Iceman, and it looks a lot better than it did in X3. Kitty can send people's consciousness back in time now. That's a new power she has. Don't worry about it. And we get to see a few other characters very briefly, like Bishop and Blink and a couple other ones. The part where Colossus falls into the portal, and then she puts a different portal out, and then he like launches at the Sentinel. That part's really cool. In the past timeline, we skip over 10 years now, so there's like a lot of catching up to do and a lot of time spent just figuring out what's going on and like what happened to half the characters that were in the previous movie. Turns out they all got drafted to Vietnam and then fucking died off screen, which is like pretty dark and kind of cool on some level, but at the same time, and like it does help to explain like why Charles is a drug addict now, but at the same time it's like, wow, okay, so all the characters that were, you know, we spent all this time sending a whole movie setting them up, they're just gone. They're just all dead now. End of story. That kind of stuff is what makes me wish that they had kind of planned out this franchise a little bit more. It would have been kind of cool to actually like build up to Days of Future Past a little bit more and have like a couple movies with the first class cast, so that when they cross over with the original cast, it's like more of a big deal. But this movie is still really, really fun and cool, so I'm on board for it anyways. Mystique becomes even more of an important character in this one. She's kind of the main crux of the entire plot. This is due to Jennifer Lawrence having starred in the Hunger Games between movies, so now she's a big star, so we gotta make her big on the poster and make the movie all about her. Mystique does play a significant role in the original Days of Future Past storyline, so fair enough, but it's still like, and she's not bad in this one. You can tell a little bit that she's not as interested in being here. But she does feel a little bit more confident in the Mystique makeup. I think that's because they like do something a little different in this one, and it makes something about it just feels like it's less of an annoying process to do. She is still just as regular Jennifer Lawrence for a good chunk of this movie. At least they do try to make it so that every time she is just Jennifer Lawrence, she's like in disguise at that point in the movie. So it still makes sense for her character. It's not like the later couple movies where she's just regular Jennifer Lawrence all the time, and it's like, well, what was the whole arc about Mutant and Proud then? We just forgot about that because J Law didn't want to put the makeup on. Well, then don't put her in the movie. Anyways, this one has some weird stuff with her character that I thought was strange. So the plot is that she's going to assassinate Bolivar Trask, Peter Dinklage, and when that happens, then the government like doubles down on his anti-mutant Sentinel program, which leads, and they also steal Mystique's blood because her blood is magic. We have to have a magic blood plot in there somewhere. And that makes the Sentinels super duper powerful in the future, and that creates the dark future timeline. So they set it as like both, we have to stop her from killing this guy because that like makes things worse for mutants in the future, but also they also try to make it like a character beat too, where it's like, oh well, this is specifically the first time that Mystique has ever killed anybody, and that kind of puts her on a darker path that makes her into more of a villain going forward. So we're not just trying to save the future, but we're trying to save Raven specifically, which I feel like is a really weird line to draw, and they like make a big deal about her not killing someone for some reason in this movie. Like they show multiple moments earlier in the movie where she almost kills somebody but doesn't, and then of course like they get to the Bolivar Trask scene and they prevent her from killing him, but then things go wrong and oh no, maybe things are actually worse than they were before, and then we get this big confrontation at the end where Magneto lifts a baseball diamond and it's fucking awesome. And then he almost kills the president, and then she almost kills Trask again, but then ultimately doesn't because Xavier like talks her down. And it's like, oh, she's not evil now because she doesn't kill anyone. And I feel like that's such a weird line to draw because this movie's also like all about redemption and like people finding their way even after they've made mistakes. Like that's why they bring Magneto into the movie. It's like, well, one, he might be able to help us reach Mystique, but two, like we're working with Magneto in the future now. Like we've made peace. We've worked out our relationship. And even though Magneto's made a bunch of mistakes and killed a lot of people, we're still willing to forgive him because he's a different guy now or whatever. And so we're going to give Magneto another shot, even though he went full villain at the end of First Class, because one, we really like him and it's fun to have Magneto in the movie, but also because like we're trying to work towards a better future, and that means working with people that we might not necessarily like. It also works with Charles's whole arc about like learning not to stumble and fall. Even when someone stumbles and falls, that doesn't mean they're lost forever. You know, Wolverine's like, I was the most broken of any of the X-Men, and you helped me find some kind of peace with who I am and what I've done, and I want to help you get better too, and all of that stuff. So it's like really weird to me that they're like specifically drawing a line on like, once Mystique kills somebody, she can never come back. Like that'll set her on the path to becoming a villain and a bad guy, and she'll never be good again. It's like, what? Why? You've worked with Mystique before and after that moment, so surely you can like get over it. Like that doesn't. It feels in contrast to the other themes of the movie to specifically draw a line at like, we gotta stop Mystique from killing someone because if you kill someone, that's no good. It's also fucking weird because Wolverine's on the team and he kills people constantly, all the time, just killing people every movie, and everyone's fine with it. Even in this movie, he's like, on one of his first scenes, he kills a bunch of guys, and like he didn't start the fight, but he sure as hell finished it. Magneto also kills people a bunch of times. I don't know if he kills that many people in this movie, but he definitely does in all the other movies. So, and Magneto, according to this movie, is not beyond redemption. So I don't know why Mystique killing one guy one time would set her on this unredeemable path. It's very weird. And I know it's because, like, of plot reasons that they have to stop that specific assassination. But it's weird that it also becomes like a character thing that they're like, oh no, we gotta stop her from killing. It's weird. There's also this other thing about, so Charles is on this drug that gets rid of his powers, but it also fixes his legs somehow. They're like, oh, it changes his DNA. It's like, it changes his DNA enough that it fixes his spine? What? It repairs his nervous system? Like, his powers aren't connected to the fact that he's disabled. Those are two different things. But whatever. Thematic ideas or something. He has to give up the ability to walk in order to become an X-Man. And that's... it's a sacrifice, but it's also allows him to be so much greater than he ever could walking around or something. I don't know. It doesn't really make sense if you think about it. So, yeah. The other angle of that is that Beast has developed this formula that he's also using, and it suppresses his mutation. So it makes him from furry beast back to just a guy, which kind of fucking ruins the whole point. The whole point of Beast as a character is, like, the whole tragedy of Beast is that he was, like, kind of weird looking, but mostly just like a regular guy with big feet. And then he tried to cure his cure or get rid of his mutation, and that made it way worse instead. It's like a don't fuck with God or whatever thing, or like it's like a Greek tragedy of like you trying to avoid your fate sets you on the path to solidifying it, or like a Jekyll and Hyde type thing where like he's part monster and part man, and he tries to, create this formula that suppresses his animal instincts or whatever, but that just makes it all the more apparent. It's like a beauty, it's sort of like a Beauty and the Beast type thing as well, where like he looks ugly on the outside, but on the inside he's actually a nice guy. It's like all the things that they're reffing on. It's the whole, like, that kind of ruins the whole point of him trying and failing to cure his powers, like making his his mutation like far more apparent. Like, that whole tragedy doesn't really work when like he just tried harder and then got it and then figured it out. Like, it's weird. And for this movie, I'm not too upset about it, because it does sort of tie in thematically to it kind of parallels Charles's storyline a little bit, where he's also trying to like forget about being an X-Man and whatever, and then he has to embrace being a mutant in order to save the day. Beast also kind of has a similar arc where he's like trying to forget about it and suppress who he is, and then he has to embrace who he is towards the end of the movie. But then the movie like forgets that they're doing something thematic with his character, and then like there's a moment where the Sentinels are attacking them, and the Sentinels are just set to kill mode, and Beast injects himself with his formula to make himself into a human again, and then or at least temporarily, and then the Sentinels like, oh, never mind, no mutants here. And it's so weird. It's like, oh, so then it's good that he developed this formula that made him back into a human, I guess. He wasn't trying to hide who he was. Or in this case, it's good that he was trying to hide who he was. The movie kind of forgets about Beast's whole friggin' character for a minute there, but it's not... I'm not able to... it's not so egregious that I'm completely unable to forgive it, because I really like this movie and I think it's fun. But it is more of a problem in later movies where he like keeps using the formula far past that being like he should be over it by then. Like, he should just embrace being blue and furry. And I don't know if Nicholas Hoult was also just like, I don't really want to wear the makeup or whatever. But then it's like, well, then why is why did you make him such a like central character? It's like, that's the character. Kelsey Grammer didn't have a problem. He just was blue the whole time, and he was great. Be more like Kelsey Grammer. I also think the ending of this movie is a little bit weird. Not the future timeline where everything's fixed. I like that stuff. But the stuff where, like, Magneto tries to kill the president because he's like, fuck this. I've had enough of your shit. And then Mystique stops him. And then Xavier's like, hey, don't kill Trask. Be like me. Be cool instead. Don't kill people. And then Mystique's like, fine. And she leaves. And then Magneto leaves. And then I think the baseball diamond is still all the way around the White House. And then somehow, instead of doubling down on trying to fight mutants, the government doesn't do that. Which feels very weird and off-brand for the United States government, especially when a guy showed how powerful he is by dropping a baseball diamond around the White House and almost killing the president, like, super easily, barely an inconvenience. I guess the idea, we get like a little newspaper clipping of like Trask got fired or whatever, and I guess the idea is that they make Trask the fall guy because his Sentinels, like, he's like, don't worry guys, I made them out of no metal at all, so Magneto can't take them over. Somehow I'm able to do that in the 70s. But sure, let's just say he figured out how to do that. And then Magneto immediately takes them over. And so they're like, well, this is obviously a terrible idea, so we shouldn't have these fucking giant killer robots because they're scary and really easy to have be taken over by Magneto. So they don't even serve the purpose that you said they would. So we're canceling the like whole Sentinel program and you're fired. Also, turns out you were trying to sell these to Vietnam and the Russians anyway, so we definitely aren't a fan of you. And I guess that is enough to change the timeline because then the Sentinel program is gone and that doesn't happen. But like that feels like there's still like endless other ways that the government could come up with ways to hunt down and kill all the mutants. Like, and they would be even more obviously a threat now because it's like very public knowledge that that mutants exist. This isn't like an isolated incident in Cuba. There's like a ton of witnesses to everything that went down in this movie, and it would be pretty hard to cover any of it up. So, like, that's just out there now. I don't know. It feels like a weird thing that I guess we'll have to wait till the next movie to find out how that all plays out. But the next movie's about Apocalypse, and it's not that good, so don't worry about it. I think that's all I have to say for Days of Future Past. Mostly, it's really good, and it wins a lot of points by just being very cool. It has really great action scenes, lots of cool uses of all the X-Men's powers. We get to see both the future and past timelines, and they cross over, and that's really fun. Yeah, this is just kind of like a solid ending for the X-Men franchise, and then they made more movies but didn't know what to do. So yeah, I also wanted to rant about William Stryker for a minute, and because he shows up in this movie and it's like, okay, like William Stryker shows up in a bunch of these movies, and I feel like he's kind of a good microcosm of like why the continuity in these movies is so bonkers and doesn't line up with anything. So feel free to skip to the next part of the video if you want, but anyways, I need to talk about William Stryker for a few minutes.
Stryker. William Stryker.
Okay, so I have a board here. Means we're getting fucking serious. I'm gonna title this. This is our William Stryker timeline. William Stryker is a character played by 3 different actors across at least 2 different timelines across the X-Men franchise. He first appears as Brian Cox in X2, X-Men United, which you think would take place sometime during the 2000s, but canonically it takes place in the not too distant future. Now, it can't be too far too distant into the not too distant future, because in the first movie that came out in the year 2000, the Twin Towers are still there. So It's early 2000s.
We're just gonna call it 2000 and X, cause that sounds cool. So William Stryker is the scientist slash military guy who put Wolverine into adamantium. I mean, put adamantium into Wolverine. And even that is like slightly inconsistent because his origin has changed a little bit in the comics over the time too. Like as he says in that movie, he's like, you were always an animal, Wolverine, I just gave you claws. But then like, he already had claws. They were just bone and you made them metal, but whatever. Let's pretend that, let's not worry about that. I just more want to talk about like how often this guy shows up, even though he's really only important in 2 movies, X-Men 2 and Origins Wolverine. But couple main things. He gave Wolverine claws, or at least he gave him adamantium claws. He also has a son named Jason, who is important because he has some kind of psychic powers and he's able to create this illusion that almost makes Xavier kill everyone on Earth. He's a mutant. And Brian Cox doesn't like that. He's disappointed in him. He also mentions that he fought in Vietnam. There's a scene where he's talking to, what's his name? Senator Kelly, except it's actually Mystique, but that's not important. Where he's like, I was killing civilians in Saigon back when you were in junior high, dickhead. And that actually comes back a couple times. So next time we see or hear from William Stryker is in X-Men Origins Wolverine, where he's played by Danny Huston, a completely different guy who doesn't look at all like Brian Cox. He barely looks like a younger guy. Like he looks like he's maybe 10 years younger than Brian Cox, and this is at least 20 years before he's gonna end up looking like Brian Cox. So we're already off to a slightly confusing start. Just from a casting perspective of the guy that got, doesn't it all look like a younger version of the older guy? Anyways, so we do Origins Wolverine. He first meets Wolverine in Vietnam, which I guess would be towards the end of the Vietnam War, I guess. So somewhere in the 60s to 70s, Vietnam happens. And that's where he first meets Wolverine, and then he recruits him to do some other, just as, if not more, shady missions in third world countries. Alex, you can't even read that. Come on, what am I doing? And then a few years go by, and then he puts adamantium into Wolverine and erases his memory with a silver bullet. And that's Origins Wolverine. And then that leads back around to X-Men 2 eventually. So far, not too confusing, apart from a guy who doesn't look anything like him. We also have a reference again to Jason. He's in here too. He's in like a tube or something, and he's like a little kid. But remember how he had a son named Jason who had a heterochromia? So we're going to put that in there too, because that's the thing we know about Brian Cox, is that he went to Vietnam and he has a son named Jason. Okay, the next time that William Stryker is mentioned is actually all the way back in X-Men First Class, which takes place in 1962. And one of the military guys who's in this movie is named like Colonel Stryker or something like that. And then Xavier reads his mind in one scene and he's like, oh, that's nice. You're thinking about your son, William. So Stryker Senior is in this movie, and he's in like a couple scenes, and he's like, oh, mutants, I don't like them. We should, be worried about them as a threat or whatever. And he's got a son named William. And that's important because we know that he's going to become William Stryker one day and put metal into Wolverine. And that's we've got to remember that there's a guy named William Stryker who will eventually put metal in Wolverine. We got to reference that. So then the next time that William Stryker shows up is in Days of Future Past, which takes place in the early 70s. And he's played by Josh Hellman, a third guy who also doesn't look like Brian Cox. He kind of looks like Danny Huston, but not that much. And also neither of them look like Brian Cox. He's in this movie. And he is like working for Trask, Peter Dinklage, who's the main human guy who doesn't like mutants and is trying to build killer robots. But he shares a lot of the same sentiments of like, Oh yeah, the mutants are bad news bears. Oh yeah, also we first meet him in Vietnam, so that comes back. Vietnam is back again, and they're leaving Vietnam because they lost.
We did not lose Vietnam. It was a tie.
Anyways, he's there, and he has like a squad of mutants who were doing like, I guess, missions in Vietnam or something. So that's like similar to the stuff that he was doing in Origins Wolverine, but it doesn't, like, it's a different group of mutants. So maybe this is just like he's got a bunch of different off the books mutant teams fighting in Vietnam or something, or it's just a different thing and don't think about it. He's mostly just kind of around Trask in a lot of these scenes. He doesn't do a whole lot himself. There is a scene where Trask is like, how's your son doing? And he's like, oh, my son Jason, he's doing fine. He's almost 10. So, because remember, he has a son named Jason. Remember, that's a thing that was established in X-Men 2, is that he has a son named Jason, and then he fought in Vietnam. So in Days of Future Past, we see him in Vietnam, and we mention that he has a son named Jason. A lot of these movies have scenes where either William Stryker or one of his relatives mentions that they have a son, and that their son will go on to be an X2 eventually. Like that's because remember in X2 when Brian Cox was there and he had a son and he mentioned that he fought in Vietnam and then he was like, "You one day finish, people will finish when I started Wolverine one day." Remember that? So then, because Days of Future Past thinks you're a fucking idiot, and the fact that there's a guy named William Stryker in this movie and he doesn't like mutants and he's working with a guy who doesn't like mutants and he fought in Vietnam and he mentions that he has a son named Jason who has heterochromia, they also hit you over the head even more by having a scene where Wolverine somehow recognizes Josh Hellman as William Stryker, even though he doesn't look like the guy he met in Origins Wolverine or the guy he met in X2, but somehow he recognizes that this guy is gonna be Brian Cox one day. So he suddenly gets all these flashbacks of when he got the metal put in him. Because remember, William Stryker is the guy that put the metal in Wolverine, and we gotta remind you that that's what's gonna happen one day. That Wolverine has metal in him. Did you know that? So then the best thing ever happens, where when he's having this flashback, they do the in case you still didn't get that he was gonna become Brian Cox. They do this terrible 90s Animorphs effect from Josh Hellman into Brian Cox because you're too stupid to realize that this is supposed to be the same guy. Probably because, once again, none of these actors look like each other. And so then they like firmly establish that William Stryker will become William Stryker, aka Brian Cox. And just when you thought it couldn't get more confusing, this movie ends on a weird cliffhanger where Wolverine gets thrown into the water, and then William Stryker, Josh Hellman, picks him out of the water and is like, "Oh, that's interesting. This guy should be dead, but he's alive still. I bet I could think of something interesting to do with him." And it's kind of like a weird, oh no, even though we've changed some things about the past, this stuff will still kind of circle around to being where it was already. But then his eyes flash yellow to imply that he's actually Mystique. This is never referenced again, and I don't know what it means or why. And the next movie, which is... Oh yeah, this also goes to a different timeline, which we're going to put over here. This is the Josh Hellman timeline. And around the same time of Origins Wolverine, in the early 80s, we got a brand new movie called Apocalypse, and that's another movie that happens. And in that movie, they make absolutely no attempt to explain the Mystique eyes. Just not at all. They don't explain it. They just don't explain it. Moving on. Like, I would be fine with literally the briefest of explanations of just like Mystique was pretending to be Stryker for some reason. And maybe she was like, oh, I can find all the other mutants that he's got held captive, because presumably he's got more than one. And then maybe I can set them free. Maybe that was her plan. Let's say that. That feels in line with Mystique. But then when she got there, she had really planned her timing wrong, and regular William Stryker was also there. And then there was 2 William Strykers in the room, and then she just abandoned that plan and left altogether, leaving Wolverine to be captured by the real Stryker. That's my headcanon, and that's me doing a lot of writing that the movies didn't, so that's not really maybe, like, I'm trying to figure out how this makes sense, because it doesn't, because Mystique, he had Mystique eyes at the end, and I think it wasn't supposed to be that. They just threw that in at the last second to make it seem like something was gonna become something, but then it isn't anything. Okay, so X-Men Apocalypse is the next movie, and in that movie, they're just like doing their own thing and stuff, and there's this Quicksilver scene, and then out of fucking nowhere, William Stryker, Josh Hellman, but he's got a different haircut this time, he just shows up at the X-Men house. How did he even know to go there? I don't know. He just shows up out of nowhere, and he captures all the X-Men, and he brings them to the base where he does his experiments on mutants, and then they find Wolverine there, and guess what? Wolverine's there, and he put metal in Wolverine, because remember, he's William Stryker, and that's what William Stryker does. And then they escape, and Wolverine escapes, and that's the last time we see of him. I don't remember if they mentioned that he has a son in that movie, but it wouldn't surprise me. Anyways, so that's the William Stryker timeline. Are you all caught up? Remember, Brian Cox is William Stryker, and in X-Men 2, he fought in Vietnam. He has a son named Jason, and he put metal in Wolverine. We're going to mention this in as many movies as possible for some reason. It's weird, too, because in the comics, the guy who put metal in Wolverine is just like a different guy. And William Stryker is from like a totally different story. So it's not even like comically accurate that William Stryker is the guy that put metal in Wolverine, but they mentioned it in like every fucking movie, even in alternate timelines where things could be different, and we even imply that they might be, but then they just aren't. So, yeah. Anyways, this will be on the test.
Fuck off, Logan.
Logan is the final X-Men movie. They never made any more after this one. I don't really have a lot to say on this one. Like, my opinions are mostly the same as everyone else's. I think this movie is really, really good. And I think it's a beautiful send-off to Hugh Jackman's Wolverine, and as kind of a little epilogue to the X-Men franchise as a whole. So it's kind of the thing that is made me a little bit worried about Wolverine Deadpool Wolverine, 100 years, Deadpool Wolverine, gonna do a movie. Because they ended so strong on this one, and then we're just gonna bring back the character again anyways. But at the same time, it's like, oh, well, now he's in the yellow and blue suit, so don't you kind of want to see him? And like, yeah. So I'm part of the problem. But Logan is really excellent. I don't know, what do you want me to say? It's really good. I think all the performances are great. I like that it's really sad. Really like seeing Patrick Stewart just like really giving a shit about a role and giving a really excellent performance and having a really interesting role in this movie. Like, his whole story is maybe even more sad than Logan's in this one, where he has this like degenerative brain thing and is just losing himself slowly. He doesn't want to take his meds, but not taking his meds puts everyone in danger. It's it's really sad. I really like all the stuff with X-23. She doesn't get a whole lot in this one because she's like kind of silent for the first like 3/4 of it. But that also kind of works, and I think she does a pretty good job. I like this actress. She's pretty good. You saw any more of her. Like, if they wanted to, this could have been a perfect point to spin off to another movie with young X-23 and leading. They could have continued the franchise that way. They didn't do that. I like that Wolverine is just kind of sad and broken and has lost everyone. The scene where he has to bury Charles is really fucking heartbreaking because he doesn't even really have the words for it. He's just so broken. I mean, I like that Wolverine is stuck taking care of both Charles and this young X-23, and he really doesn't want to, but like we all know that he's a good guy on the inside, and so he reluctantly takes care of them, but he fucking hates doing it. It's great. It's awesome. The villains in this movie are like a little bit weak. Oh, my light is freaking out. Okay, whatever. My light's a little blue now. I don't know how to fix it. Oh yeah, the villains. The villains are okay. I kind of am alright with the evil Wolverine final boss. It's not really anything, but it does kind of work thematically as Wolverine facing like the darker version of himself. They even put him in like a black tank top, so you know he's the bad Wolverine. And it kind of circles back around on some of the themes of the character as a whole, is he feels that he's just this mindless. He's trying to fight against being just this mindless killing machine, about being against being this animal, this weapon that he was designed to be. And he's been fighting against that identity his whole life. And then he is faced with this evil version of himself that literally is that. We see in like the Wolverine and in some of the other movies that he kind of blames. Logan kind of blames himself for all the people that he's lost, either because he actually killed them or like he feels at fault for it. And here, once again, this evil Wolverine kills Charles, and so like being around Logan kind of killed Charles. So I think it does kind of work as a sort of thematic final boss, even if it's not the most deep character necessarily. But that's fine for this movie. I don't know what else to say. I think this one is really good, and it's a beautiful exercise. It's a beautiful exercise in misery, and they let the director like be a director and take a big swing and just not worry about how it fits into continuity at all, which the continuity was already kind of fucked by this point in the X-Men movies anyway, so it doesn't really bother me. I've always sort of thought of this one as like an out of continuity epilogue, kind of like the Dark Knight Returns, where it's like this is the last Batman story, but it doesn't really take place in canon necessarily, and that's sort of what I think of this. But it's a nice like send off death of Wolverine for Hugh Jackman's portrayal. Like it's the end point to that version of the character, and it's pretty good. I like that it commits to killing him off, and they don't do any like dumb post-credit scenes where he comes back, which is why I'm worried about Deadpool Wolverine, because they're just like, fuck it, we're bringing back anyways, we don't even give a shit. Yeah, I don't know, everything you've heard about this movie is true. The rumors are true. Logan is really good. Is it the best X-Men movie? I don't know, maybe. It's up there. That's this one. Sorry. I don't have any hot takes. It's a good movie. Cha, the end.
I really wish we could sew his mouth shut again.
Oh, hi there. I bet you're wondering how I got here. Deadpool. It is very hot out, and I'm right next to the highway, and I don't know how the sound is going to come out. We're going to give this a shot. I think it's easy to forget that Deadpool was actually a really big deal when it first came out, although by today's standards it feels like a little bit quaint. It proved that a subversive R-rated superhero movie could be successful. which paved the ways for stuff like Logan, The Boys, Invincible, a lot of the stuff that James Gunn has done as well, with like Peacemaker and stuff, I feel like can be traced back to Deadpool on some level. But the movie itself is actually very, very simple, and that was due to it having like a very small budget, which meant that they had to kind of be more creative with the storytelling and the framing device of the movie. So we get one of the most, I bet you're wondering how I got here's of all time. But it's very obvious that this is done for like budgetary reasons, as there's basically only like 2 action scenes in the whole movie. The one on the overpass and then the one at the end helicarrier thing. So most of the movie ends up just being like regular ass Ryan Reynolds and Marina Baccarin, who's fucking gorgeous and great, just like hanging out and fucking and dating. And they play the romance like actually pretty straight in this movie. Like Ryan Reynolds, since Deadpool, has gotten a lot of flack, and I've also found him a little more tiresome from doing the like wink at the camera, like, oh, isn't this silly that this is happening to me? Just kind of playing Deadpool in every other role. But here this movie actually like kind of plays a lot of the main romance beats like very straightforward. It actually takes some of the like cancer stuff that Deadpool's going through like mostly pretty seriously. Yes, it gets very silly and stuff, but they also frame it as like Deadpool, the character, Wade Wilson, has obviously been through a lot of trauma, and so you can kind of tell that he uses humor as like a coping mechanism. It feels less cynical than you think it would, strangely. The origin story of this movie even happening is also one of the things I find more interesting about it than the movie itself. Ryan Reynolds, of course, played Deadpool kind of in Origins Wolverine, but they like totally fucked up his character. Although when he was just Wade Wilson earlier in the movie, he was actually not bad in the role. And that led to this long campaign of him trying to get a Deadpool movie made and have it actually be R-rated and be like faithful to the source material, which eventually led to like this test footage being created and then leaked online by someone. Who knows who could have done that? Definitely not anyone who was involved in the project and wanted to get the movie made. But then that went viral and picked up a lot of steam, and then suddenly the studio was more okay with greenlighting the project to begin with. And a lot of the DNA from that test footage ends up in the final movie. Tim Miller directs this one. He's done a lot of stuff with animation, and he worked at Blur Studios, who's done a lot of like the big cinematic trailers for a lot of video games. And it's good. It's got really cool action. Again, it's like resourceful. Like the sequence where Deadpool only has 12 bullets left, and so he has to make them count while fighting all these different bad guys, is like kind of a really clever action scene. It's also kind of representative of the movie as a whole. It's like, we only have so much budget, so we got to figure out how to make it like last the whole movie. Some stuff about this movie is kind of generic. It's got a very basic superhero origin story to it. The main villain is like one of the most generic villains ever, but it kind of works because it's also like a self-aware parody of generic superhero villain. So like, it's fine. But then you also get to have fun with characters like Colossus, who's great. He's like also kind of a parody of Colossus, but works for this movie. Negasonic Teenage Warhead fucking rules as like an over-the-top parody of an angsty teen. It's genius, and she does a great job in the role. But yeah, this is a solid movie, and although it would eventually lead to more watered-down versions of Ryan Reynolds doing his Deadpool shtick in lesser movies, this one is still pretty solid. I like a lot of the jokes, and I think it's a good time. Also, this movie has one of my favorite Stan Lee cameos for the simple fact of not only putting him in a strip club, but putting him in the same frame as titties. And I think that's genius.
That was amazing! We need to do it again!
Deadpool 2. I feel like in a lot of ways, Deadpool 2 is kind of an improvement on the original. We have a bigger budget this time, and boy does it show. There's way more action scenes and way more effects, way more characters. But it also manages to balance everything pretty well and frame it all in a story that's kind of genuine about family, and more specifically found family, and trying to heal through your past traumas. This time David Leitch is directing. There were some creative differences between Reynolds and Tim Miller, so he's out. This time David Leitch takes over directing, and I've really liked pretty much all of his movies. The first John Wick, Atomic Blonde, Bullet Train, Fall Guy this year were all excellent. And he's really good at directing action because he was a former stunt guy, so he knows how to fucking do action. And the action in this movie is really fucking cool. We also get much more of it. It's really creative. We get to use all the different characters' like powers in creative ways. The bit with Domino about how she has luck-based powers, and Deadpool's like, how would you even show that cinematically? That doesn't make any sense. And then it ends up being like a really cool sequence. I like Deadpool's chemistry with Cable. I think Cable's a really fun foil to the character. I really like Fire Fist, the kid from The Hunt for the Wilder People, who's been in Hunt for the Wilder People, this, and then I think he was in one of the Godzilla movies, but then we haven't seen him in anything like else, and I don't know why. He's great, and I want to see him in more things. Put him in more movies. This movie is kind of interesting. It has a couple different edits of the movie. There's the original cut, then there's like the super duper cut or something, which is like the director's extended cut or whatever, which has like more jokes and an extended one-take fight sequence, which is pretty cool. You can see that on YouTube, I think. And then there's also the Once Upon a Deadpool version, which is like a PG-13 cut. I don't know. There's like some fun bits with Fred Savage where they bring him back as his role from Princess Bride, kind of. But I find that kind of like cynical. It felt like I think Disney had just bought or Disney had just bought Fox, and so they're like, we want to use Deadpool in some way because he makes money, but can we push it to PG-13 without upsetting too many fans? That's what it felt like to me, so I wasn't like a huge fan of that existing. A lot of the fun of the Deadpool movies is not just the movies themselves, but some of the like weird viral marketing around the movies and stuff. And a lot of that I think is sometimes a lot more interesting than the movies themselves. Like even when Ryan Reynolds will kind of like do that with his other movies, that stuff ends up being more interesting than those other movies that he ends up in. Like honestly, that's, I think, Ryan Reynolds' true calling is like a marketing guy, weirdly. There's also an excellent Celine Dion music video for this movie that goes so much harder than it needed to, and it's amazing.
Listen, this thing only goes to 11, so beat it, Spider-Man.
But it's that kind of extra effort, one could even say a maximum effort, that goes into these movies, the passion behind it and all the people involved, that I think really makes them work. You can really tell that Ryan Reynolds just fucking loves being Deadpool and will do whatever it takes to get that to happen. So I kind of really dig that energy. It feels a lot less cynical than a lot of his other products. I mean, movies where he's mostly just talking about his gin company and the football team that he owns or whatever. But with like Deadpool, he seems to just genuinely love being the character, and I think that's cool. What else do I have to say about Deadpool 2? I really like it. I think it's really cool and fun. I like how it expands upon the first one. It does every now and then come into the comedy sequel problem of like, hey, remember this joke from the first one? Here's that joke again. But sometimes I think it's done really well. Like, for example, there's one moment where Deadpool's getting his secret stash of cocaine in his apartment with Blind Al, and you can see that it's next to a box labeled "The Cure for Blindness," which is a callback to the joke from the first movie. Oh man, you probably can't see because I'm far away, but I'm sweating like the Jordan Peele meme. So that's what I look like right now. At the same time, I do really like that because it's a sequel, we can jump straight into the action and straight into the story. We don't have to waste time setting things up. We can just get to Deadpool killing people and making jokes. This does run into the trope of fridging the love interest. They kill off Marina Baccarin right away to give Deadpool motivation, which is kind of sad because I like Marina Baccarin. She's great. But this movie is a little bit more smart about it. One, it does like make fun of itself, so it can kind of It's a little bit easier to get away with, but it's also smart and it doesn't make the whole movie just like a generic revenge story. Deadpool kills the guy that killed his girlfriend immediately before the opening credits. So that puts him on a more like aimless path. He doesn't even have revenge to look for. So like he's really stuck searching for how do I find meaning? Interestingly, this movie kind of has a very similar plotline to Days of Future Past, where a time traveler goes back in time to stop somebody from killing someone before, so that to prevent them from becoming a villain later in the movie, which is the thing I talked about that they did with Mystique in that movie. However, I kind of feel like it works a little bit better here. It does still run into the problem of like, oh no, we have to stop, I think it's Russell, from killing this one guy, because once he starts killing people, then, you know, he becomes a bad guy. Meanwhile, Deadpool's like killing so many people constantly. Cable's murdering people left and right. Even Domino kills a whole bunch of people in the third act. It has that like problem that a lot of video games run into, where like you murder through like hordes and hordes of enemies to get to the final boss, and then your character will be like, should I kill them? I'm not sure. Even though that's the main guy that hurt them in the first place, that they have like beef with. So yeah, it is a little bit weird that they're like, oh no, we have to stop Russell from killing the main bad guy of this mutant conversion therapy camp thing. Meanwhile, they're killing all of the guys up to that point. But I weirdly think it kind of works, because one, they have a firm stance on like, no, this guy does deserve to die, and he does end up getting killed. So it all works out in the end. But also, the arc is more about like Deadpool growing as a person and reaching out to this kid and trying to help him, where he failed to do that earlier in the movie. It also ties into the themes of him like wanting a family and wanting to have a kid at some point. And so it becomes this arc that's more about like friendship and family than about like whether or not a guy kills a guy or not. Like the main thing that was leading Russell down this dark path was that he felt like nobody cared about him. And so the main arc is Deadpool choosing to care about him. And that's, I think, what makes it work. But yeah, this movie's just really fun. I think it has a lot of great action scenes again. I love the X-Force sequence where they recruit all these team members and then just they all die brutally. We get a fun Brad Pitt cameo, which David Leitch was able to score because he knows Brad Pitt from when he stunt doubled him in Fight Club. And then they work together again in Bullet Train. So, I don't know. I think that's fun. Oh yeah, Negasonic Teenage Warhead comes back in this movie, and she's dating Yukio from the Wolverine, except she's a totally different character. And I think that's great. This is like weirdly the first gay representation in an X-Men movie. Even though there have been very like queer-coded characters before, like Iceman has that whole "have you tried not being a mutant" scene, and then also he's like, even though he's dating Rogue, he's like suspiciously spends a lot of time ice skating with this page boy. So, you know. But it's nice to see some like actual, genuine queer representation in an X-Men movie when that's like a coded theme throughout the franchise. And they do it so casually, and it's perfect. It's like, yeah, this is my girlfriend, the end. And that's it. It's great. That's all the X-Men movies. They never made any more.
Hey, Hugh, you want to play Wolverine one more time?
Yeah, sure, Ryan.
And this brings us to Deadpool and Wolverine, which is coming out in about a week. I'm both extremely skeptical and also kind of excited about this movie. This time, Hollywood hack Sean Levy is directing. He's done some decent movies, like Cheaper by the Dozen and the Night of the Museum movies, which strangely have a Wolverine cameo in one of those. He also did Free Guy from a couple of years ago, which I really didn't like. I thought it was kind of really bad. I also know this movie had production problems due to the writers and actors strikes from last year. I don't know the extent of how that is affected the movie, but I'm guessing it didn't make things smoother. It's also just been a while since Marvel Studios has had like a really good movie that they've put out outside of like Guardians 3, which is, I think mostly due to James Gunn than anything else. So I'm very skeptical going into this one. But at the same time, they finally put Wolverine in the yellow and blue costume from the comics. So I'm kind of also really excited for it. And going back and rewatching all these previous X-Men movies has reminded me that I really like Wolverine. I think he's a really fun character. I really love Hugh Jackman's portrayal of him. And I kind of want to see another movie with him in it. So I'm kind of down. I really hope this one is good, although I'm worried that I've sort of set myself up to be disappointed by getting hyped up on rewatching all the X-Men movies and as opposed to just going in with like low expectations. But I'm not doing that. Oops. But against my better judgment, I'm kind of excited to see more X-Men stuff. X-Men 97 was fantastic, and so I like these characters and I want to see more of them. And yes, I do think it is kind of a misstep to bring Hugh Jackman back after the kind of perfect ending of Logan, even if this does take place before that or whatever it is, or if it's the usual X-Men continuity of don't think about it too much. I'm kind of mixed. Like I'm very conflicted on this one. I'm excited for it, but I'm also very worried about it. I really, really want it to be good. And the whole like concept of this movie even existing, I think, is kind of strange. It feels also like Marvel's really getting desperate, and so they're like, what if we bring back Hugh Jackman? Will you go see the movies again if he's there? And I think Marvel Studios on some level is kind of hoping that this will like save the MCU and be the bestest, most successful movie of all time. But at the same time, this movie seems to have the attitude of just like that one clip of Ryan Reynolds being like, hey Hugh, want to come back as Wolverine? And he's like, yeah, sure, whatever. But I kind of like that energy more, weirdly, where it's like, hey, we're just doing another one just because we feel like it. Come see it, I guess. Obviously, I'll have to reserve judgment for when I actually go to see the movie. Boy, do I hope it's good, and hell yeah, Wolverine's finally in the costume. My lizard brain is really telling me that that's all I need to be interested in a movie is if you put Hugh Jackman in the Wolverine costume. I'm also a little bit like frustrated on that too, because I think we're not. I'm almost positive we're not gonna get the full like mask cowl thing that he has. Like they're just gonna show Hugh Jackman's face the whole time, which is fine. But like, if you're gonna do the costume for real this time, like at least go all the way with it, man. Like, at least give us as much Wolverine in Wolverine's mask as we got Snake Eyes in the Snake Eyes mask in the Snake Eyes movie. At least give us that much of it. But I guess we'll have to wait and see for next week for how this movie turns out. Is it any good? We'll see, and I'll be back next week sometime to talk about it. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it to the end of this long ass video. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and leave a comment. What do you think? What's your favorite X-Men movie? Are you excited for Deadpool Wolverine? Is it going to be good? I don't know. What do you think? That's it for now. We'll see you next time, bub. And I will sign off with the classic Wolverine catchphrase, go fuck yourself.